Hi guys, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about metabolism. This topic is a very awesome topic because it brings everything together. We've been talking about macronutrients so far. We've been talking about proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. Though your book covers them in such details, but we can't really talk about how they come in use. But starting this week and next week, we can talk about how we actually use these macronutrients. So the main purpose of metabolism is so that we can use energy, get energy out of these macronutrients that we consume. So why aren't we bringing vitamins and minerals into this discussion? Because vitamins and minerals do not give us energy at all. They might be energy boosters because, as I want to really cover this when we talk about vitamins and minerals later on, as we see there are coenzymes or cofactors in metabolism. For instance, magnesium helps us in metabolism, or as I told you guys last week about proteins, B6 is a coenzyme in protein metabolism and the rest of them, but none of them actually give us energy. The purpose of metabolism is that so we get energy. Doesn't matter if you're sleeping, doesn't matter if you're just laying low, as I call it, you're always consuming energy. So that is really the most important thing that happens to us. That is why we eat at all, right? So let's have a little review. Most of amino acids give us glucose and fatty acids. So why do I say most of them? Because there are two amino acids that are ketogenic, lysine and leucine. So when we say they're ketogenic exclusively, that means they can only be converted to keto acids. There's never a situation that those two can be converted to glucose. But also there is another condition. Only when our diet is the percentage of protein in our diet is really high, that amino acids volunteer and they're expected to make fatty acid, and they participate in fatty acid synthesis. All right, this is very important to remember. So it is not the first role that they play. They don't, as soon as you have proteins, they don't go and produce fatty acids. It's only if there's a surplus of them. Carbohydrates, we synthesize fatty acids from them, again, excess of them. And fatty acids, though, cannot give us glucose. It's very important to remember this, that fatty acids don't give us this. So sometimes people get confused and say, okay, how about people that are on high fat diets? Then how do they get energy? Glycerol can get converted to glucose, so remember that. So glycerol can actually go through glycolysis, right? So glycerol can get converted to glucose. Always remember that. And why is this important for us? Because glucose is a primary fuel for brain and some other organs in our body, but brain being the most important one. Brain, because is the king and dictates most of the functions in all the functions in our body, right? So we really care mostly about where the brain gets the energy. All right, so no fatty acids ever gets converted to glucose, and that is because we do not have that mechanism, that enzyme that converts fatty acids to glucose. And let's talk about the heart muscle, cardiac muscle. What is so special about the cardiac muscle? That it's always working. So if you're thinking about the muscles in your arms or muscles anywhere else in your body, they do not always work. But your heart muscle, we better hope that it's always working or you won't be alive, right? So fatty acids are the primary fuel source for your cardiac muscle. That is the primary source, but that doesn't mean your cardiac muscle does not have other sources for muscle. It still uses glucose, but it favors fatty acids. So because it uses glucose, it does have GLUT4 gates. GLUT4 is the gateway for glucose. So any muscle, any organ in our body that has GLUT4, that means it uses glucose. So pay attention that it uses both, but it just favors fatty acids. All right. So if somebody is on a high fat diet, their cardiac muscle will not be in trouble at all. Beta oxidation is entirely an aerobic process. That's why cardiac muscles, they have loads of mitochondria, because beta oxidation happens in mitochondria. So always remember that one of the reasons that fatty acids are very important and primary source fuel for the cardiac muscle is because your cardiac muscle works all the time. It's not like other muscles. So for instance, let's think about the muscles that you have in your arms. They're not working all the time. They're working really hard if you're exercising, or if you're lifting something at home, if you're lifting your pen, I don't know, your book, whatever, but they're not working all the time. Okay? Once the glucose that you are digesting or eating goes in your muscle, it is trapped, it is dealt with, all right? It can't leave the muscle. Muscle keeps it. Muscle loves the glucose to be its own. And what is the reason? Because we do not have glucose 6 phosphatase, which is the enzyme that frees up the glucose. So once you have the glucose in the muscle, it's done with. But muscle is very giving. It's one of the organs that is giving, and it contributes back to the community, as that's the way I like to remember and I like to say. How does it give back? So muscle, by giving back alanine and also lactate, when you exercise really hard, you produce lactate. Where does lactate go? It goes back to liver and it gets converted to glucose, right? And then the body can use it again. Alanine also is the most glucogenic amino acid that we talked about last time. So these are the two ways that muscle gives back to the body or to the community. So it gives back the glucose that it once traps, all right? So it gives back. Brain, though, on the other hand, the main fuel that your brain loves to use is glucose. It's the main fuel. That is why people that fast, people that go on diets that do not contain too much carbohydrate or glucose, or it's very slim, they don't feel very sharp, at least in the beginning when they're not adapted to the diet, because it is the primary source for the brain. And brain is not very giving. So not only it does not have any, not only it doesn't have any storage source, it can't store any glucose in the form of storage, it is not very giving. It does not give any alanine or lactate or whatever back to the body. It is not very giving to the community. Okay? I wrote this here so that you remember, even somebody who is on a high fat diet, they still need some carbohydrate for the complete fat oxidation. But that is a discussion that we can get on to it later on as well. I just wanted you to know that even a complete fat oxidation needs some carbohydrate. But yeah, so brain is the one that does not give back. It's not in the mood of giving back. How about red blood cells? So red blood cells, what happens when they grow up, as they grow up, they lose their mitochondria. That means they can't breathe any longer. So anything that they do, it's anaerobic. So they constantly are producing lactate in our body, constantly. So they are giving. So they exclusively use glucose, right? They completely rely on glucose. Doesn't matter what you're doing, your red blood cells will live on glucose. However, they're giving. So they give lactate back. That is why even, I will mention this again later on, but even when your body is going through glycolysis, when you're eating through the fed state, your body is going through glycolysis, right? But there is always a bit of gluconeogenesis that is happening, and that is because red blood cells are constantly producing lactate. The advantage that our blood cell has is that they can't consume any of the O2 that they are transferring. So, hemoglobin. What does hemoglobin do? They transfer the oxygen. So they're only the transporter. They don't consume any of the oxygen that they transfer, right? but glycolysis is an inefficient means of ATP production for them because they can't the aerobic glycolysis, right? Because they can't go through that whole cycle of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA and so forth.